Good evening, and welcome to the Lowdown. My name is Elson Low. I'll be your host tonight. As we always say, start your night off on a high with Elson Low. Thank you for joining us here tonight. We're going to have a light chat about a few things. We're going to have a laugh, as we always try to keep it light here on the Lowdown. Thank you for joining us, and please share that link. Please share that link. Let's try and give everyone an opportunity to catch up with us tonight here on the Lowdown. We've got a fun show for you guys tonight. We're going to talk a bit about the press conference. We're going to talk a bit about some of the news events that have come up that are very entertaining, but also very important for Guyana's future. So we'll chat a bit about that. We'll talk a bit about cost of living and how that's been affecting households across the country and what the PNCR has proposed should be done about that. So we'll have a chat on a wide range of issues. It should be fun as always. So please share that link, folks. Share that link. Let's get everyone on. Let's get everyone looking at the show. It should be really fun, as it always is, talking with you guys. We've had a little bit of a break of a few weeks due to me traveling for a bit, but I'm back and I'm very excited to get going again. I'm excited to be involved. Now, this particular evening show, well, Tuesdays, normally we have our show on Saturday evenings, but on Tuesdays, we're going to be having a version of the show called Issues in the News, where we're going to look at some of the issues that have come up, whether it's in news articles or the press conference of the day, give you a bit more depth, or any other incidents that have attracted national or international attention. So we're going to talk about issues in the news. Of course, you know, the Lowdown is all about the economic growth of Guyana, and is also about how young people can get involved and benefit and be a part of this massive expansion that we're seeing. So we'll talk about it all in that lens, with that lens. But we will talk a bit more about news items and so on. And in fact, there are some news items that have come up that are tied to some of the shows that we have had here on the Lowdown, some of our Saturday night shows. So we'll revisit that, and hopefully that will give you some perspective and remind you of some of the things that we discussed, because as much as we discuss it, you know, you're seeing these things play out in the actual national narrative. We're seeing these things play out nationally. So share the link, folks. Share the link. Let's try and get everyone watching tonight. We've just come on the back of the Independence holiday. There's lots of the carnival celebrations. If you went to any of those Guyana carnival celebrations, unfortunately, some of those celebrations ended up yielding not the best, atmosphere, not the best outcomes, with shots being fired. But we're one or another, we're celebrating Guyana's independence, and maybe on the Saturday night show we'll go into a little bit more depth on some of those events. But pretty wild, folks, pretty wild. Guyana Carnival and so on. That period, the Carnival period, has been pretty wild here for independence in Guyana, with a lot of unfortunate things happening, but also I'm sure a lot of people having fun. So we trust that you had fun over the course of the past few days, and we're able to take part in the celebrations. So share that link, folks. Share that link. Let's try and get everyone in tonight. What we're gonna start off the show with actually is something that we haven't done before, but I'd like to introduce it to the various shows, the Lowdown shows. But what we'll do is we'll do an oil price check. So I encouraged people during the press conference today to check the oil price every day. You know, it's something that you can do. It just takes 2 seconds out of your day, and you can check to see what the oil price is, because it's important for us, now that we're a major producer of oil, to keep an eye on developments in that industry, to keep an eye on the price, to make sure that we always have a sense of what's going on, because we want to make sure that we're not behind, that we're not unaware of what's going on and how that will directly affect our lives, both in terms of revenue from production, but also in terms of the price that we pay at the pump. Because, of course, when you've got these higher oil prices, that's going to make it more difficult for you at the pump. And in fact, we've seen the government recently say, so I guess we're starting off with the news here. We've seen the government recently say that they've lowered the excise tax on fuel. That's the tax that they charge on fuel. They've lowered that tax right down to zero. So there's no further relief that is available regarding higher gas prices. So what we're going to see now is those prices, does the oil price rise? We're going to see it rise all the way up, because there isn't that cushion of reducing the taxes that we were previously looking at. It's unfortunate, but that's what's going on right now. That's what we're seeing the government say. They have no more wiggle room to reduce those prices at the pump. So that's why it's important to always keep an eye on the oil price. On the flip side, Guyana, when we had about $74, when oil was around there, the projected growth for the country was around 40, close to 50%. However, we've seen oil prices blow way past, pardon me, way past the $74 mark, much beyond that. So we're now at $124, which, if my math is right, is $50 over, which is more than 50% higher than anticipated. So we are likely to see Guyana's growth come in at a very high number, much higher perhaps than expected. So the oil price, as I said, is $124 a barrel for Brent crude. That's the international oil that's most comparable to our. That's the benchmark that's typically used for our type of export. There's also West Texas, which is locally produced U.S. oil, which is a little bit lower always. But the international price that we should focus on is the Brent oil price, and that's at $124. It's up. It was down a little bit a short while ago. It was down, and that's why gas prices were not as elevated. But now it's gone back up, so you can anticipate those prices will be going up again. The reason for this is that, or at least the reason that is been put forward by international agencies, is that the EU has finally decided that they're going to ban Russian oil imports. So that is going to cause a reduction in the amount of oil that's available to be purchased. So the EU is going to ban that. And the second thing is that the lockdowns, COVID-19 lockdowns in many parts of China are being lifted, which has meant that people will now be able to drive again and travel again, and manufacturing can resume in China, which has meant that the demand for oil will now go up. So on the one hand, you have less oil on the market there, and less Europeans have to go looking for oil elsewhere. That's driving up the price. And then the other hand, you have that the Chinese now are coming back into the oil market after going through a lockdown. So unfortunately, if you're a consumer, that means that your price at the pump is likely to soon go back up, unfortunately. But of course, Guyana produces oil, so we're going to blow past, I believe, our GDP growth estimates. We're going to have a year of tremendous growth, tremendous opportunity, and we have to see how it is that we can position ourselves as individuals, but it's also important to recognize how the country is benefiting in terms of its oil revenues. So that's our oil price check for today, $124 a barrel. Yeah, moving along nicely. That's a hefty price right there. On that note, the one of the interesting things that we want to talk about today, and I'll ask the operators to bring up the first slide, is the question of cost recovery and the audits of the cost recovery. So it is. If you're not aware, Exxon is able, as part of our agreement, whenever Exxon incurs costs in terms of the development of the oil fields, the drilling, and so on, where they find oil, we essentially allow them to charge that off from the overall oil revenues before we take part of our profit oil. So Exxon is able to recover the cost of its workers being involved in that industry when it comes to prospecting for oil, and the costs of developing things in the fields, the cost of the floating production and storage vessels, the FPSOs, that actually extract the oil. Exxon is able to recover all of those costs. The reason that this is such an important issue, that cost recovery is so important, is that Exxon could, and we're not saying that Exxon is doing this, but Exxon could charge Guyana for literally anything that they feel like charging us. Because if we're not going to check, then how would we know that they're doing that? So the audit is the way that we check to know what Exxon has been spending money on, how it's been spending that money, and whether it's been doing that in saving the country money or spending the money across the board. So that's what we're going to find out. Hopefully, the audit will reveal some of this information. I'm curious. I'm going to reserve judgment until I see the audit. But one of the things that is concerning about the process is that some companies, again, we're not saying that Exxon's involved in this, but some companies have actually put up fake companies or shell companies to and purchase goods from them at inflated prices so that they can get extra profit when these types of cost recovery schemes have been implemented in the past. And so we need to monitor as much as possible, monitor these types of things to see what is going on, what our money is being spent on, and whether we're getting the full benefits. There's actually been, there's some studies that indicate that if it weren't for these improper practices with natural resources, where companies improperly account for what their costs were, the entirety of Africa would be developed already. So that's the indication. That's how serious of an issue it is. And of this $9 billion that's going to be audited, some estimates have said that as much as 900 million could be how much the price or the costs are inflated. Again, we're not saying that that's the case. We don't know that. But that's what some academic estimates of these types of things are. So, of course, we've got to exercise some real focus on this issue and get it done. We've seen the government come under a little bit of criticism for not allowing the last the time period in which they had to audit some of Exxon's costs, for allowing that to actually lapse. And as a result, we've got to go back and ask Exxon if they'll allow us to audit them, which is first of all, as a country, for a government to have to do that, that's pretty embarrassing. But second of all, it raises a real question as to what level of cooperation we'll get and things like that, because it's an unusual circumstance. It's a very unusual circumstance. We should have taken care of this before even getting to this, even letting that time period elapse. And so we're now seeing some moves towards auditing Exxon. We're now seeing some moves in the right direction on this issue. I have personally said that given the scale of the loss that could be occurring for the country, a $900 million loss, US, not 900 million Ghana dollars, 900 million US. Let's be clear on that. Is nothing small. That is a huge, huge potential loss, massive. So we've got to make sure that we don't suffer from that type of practice, of improper practice by extractive industry companies. And the way to do that is through auditing these companies. That's the way that you do that. So we're getting an audit. I've said that not doing these audits should be a criminal offense for the government to let these things lapse and not do them because of the scale of the cost of the country. That should be a criminal offense. In my opinion, that is something which has such a big impact on the country that it should be a criminal offense. That's an opinion that I've expressed previously, and something that I think many Guyanese have an understanding of why this is so important. But anyway, so that's the cost recovery issue. We're going to talk a bit about the Amalia Falls Hydro Project. Then we're going to talk a bit about cost of living and so on. But first of all, let's talk about this Amalia Falls Hydro Project. And let's get the next slide up there. What we want to do for you viewers, like I said, we're keeping it light. We just want to gently point to a headline. You'll see it circled there. That harkens back to some of the content that we did on one of our shows. So this is a front page headline for Kitro, which refers really to some of the content we did on our show, and it calls into question the spending at Amalia by the government as being totally inappropriate spending, as not backed up well by the government, is not making any sense. So that's a headline that's come out. Yeah, it could be that we're very misguided in our opinion, but it would appear that some newspapers have a sense that that opinion is a reasonable one. Let's get the next slide up. Yeah, there we go. So we've got another article, another newspaper front page here, which is talking about Amalia Falls Hydro. And where, if you look right at the bottom, what's circled in red, where we talk about the savings from investing in solar power as opposed to Amalia Falls as hydroelectric power. And that there are very substantial savings, first of all, in the construction of the dam versus the solar field. There's a $200 million savings right off the bat. But actually in the cost of electricity produced, whereas it's 2 or 3 cents for solar, it's 7 cents at the best case for Amalia, and the government was going to sell that electricity back to the Guyanese citizens at 15 cents per kilowatt hour, so twice the price essentially that they were paying for it. Why they were going to do that remains a mystery of the highest order, and would perhaps tickle the fancy of even the most curious onlooker. So that is what we've observed with Amalia, where there are newspapers that are picking up what we're saying about how concerning this particular project is. But let's back it up, and let's just remind everyone what Amalia is, where it is, and what are some of the key things that have caused controversy over the years. So essentially, there was a study done to determine whether there was hydroelectric power potential in Guyana, land of many waters. And the study actually was able to identify Amalia as one of two top targets. I think the best target, really, the study identified it as. But this is a study that was done quite some time ago. And that study, having identified Amalia, did not really address the fall in costs of alternative energy solutions, given that it's a long time ago and a lot has changed. It could clearly not have predicted the future, but it's an older study. And so essentially it indicated that if you want to do hydro, you'd have to do hydro at Amalia. Okay. Now, where exactly is this particular falls? And that is a big part of the controversy. Amalia Falls is actually in Region 8, so the furthest corner of Guyana, the region that is, I think, has the smallest population, the least number of roads and things like that. It's a very difficult area for you to get in terms of transport, but also since there's not many established roads, you'd have to build a road to get access to Amalia Falls itself. So you first of all have to build a road. That's the first step. That's the first barrier that you have to actually making progress in the Amalia Falls Hydro. You have to first of all build the road to go in. And when this project was first attempted, way back when, and the contractor was not able to build the road. So the project never even got off the ground to the extent that the contractor had built the road. We didn't even get off the ground to that extent. Rather, we were completely stalled, and the costs were going through the roof, and the road was not built. Okay, so that's our starting point. And the reason that this geography is so important is that it plays a very big part in how difficult it is to execute the Amalia Falls Hydro project. It's tremendously difficult because it's a tremendously difficult circumstance. So that's the first part. Let's look at the cost of it. Amalia Falls originally cost about 350 million US. Now the government is looking to build it for 700 million US, so it's pretty much double the price. So that's quite a bit, and that doubling of price, that is also incredibly controversial. But we'll get to that. Essentially, there was a build, operate, own transfer contract, a boot contract, which the government had tried to put in place really with a Chinese contractor that was, tendered and so on, where that contractor would finance and build the project themselves and any additional costs they would have to bear. So they'd be the owner really of Amalia Falls, and we'd guarantee that we'd purchase electricity from them. Okay, fine, good start. What is interesting though is that because there were concerns about the cost of Amalia when Amalia started to double and triple in cost, this by the government could be seen as a way for them to keep a lid on the costs. So it's a fixed amount that we're going to build it for. If anything goes wrong, it's the contractor's problem. It's a way to keep a lid on the cost. Fine. However, the problem that we've heard recently, and the reason that this has come up in the news, a bit of a curved way to get here, but the reason that this has come up in the news is that there is a problem where the contractor now wants to pull out of the project. Contractor now wants to pull out the project. There's concerns about, there seems to be a dispute to a certain extent about the costs, and the contractor saying that they can't really finance this project. What is entertaining about this, folks? What is very entertaining about it is we've indicated, many people have indicated that this is a very difficult project to execute. Very difficult. And even before we've gotten to the stage where we're building the road, we're moving in vehicles, we're getting all that heavy infrastructure set down, we've already got a problem with the contractor. We've already got a situation where there's a dispute and the contractor wants to pull out. We've only just started this process. We haven't even started to build the falls properly yet. We've not even really touched the ground here, hit the ground running here, and already there's a problem. And so it's funny in that it is so expected, so typical, so normal of this project to give trouble that it's not even a shock that there's trouble. It's totally understandable that the project is a very difficult project to execute. And so as a result of refocusing on and reviving this project, what has happened is the PPP has put themselves into quite a bit of a pickle because they've got a project that it's very difficult to do, is likely to be very expensive, and a contractor which doesn't want to be involved because, we'll see what the reasons the contractor gives for not wanting to be involved. But we've got a contractor that doesn't want to be involved. Of course, we have indicated that this may be because of difficulty in the program. We've indicated that that is a challenge that has been faced in the program, but we don't know, and we look forward to hearing a full explanation from the company as to why they don't want to build Amalia Falls. But while that is one thing that is going on, what we're hearing is that there's going to be an effort, or likely to be an effort, to retender Amalia Falls. So retender it. So what does that mean? It means that they're going to go back to the procurement process, go all the way back through the procurement process and say, all right, we've decided that we still want to do this dam. We need someone to do it. So we're going to ask you what your costs are, and the lowest bidder or the best bidder with a low bid is going to be the one that does the Amalia Falls project. Okay, sounds good. However, that will also push us back in terms of when we get this project done by maybe 6 months, maybe a year. We've already seen the Amalia Falls project be pushed back a bit over the course of discussions and tendering and so on and so forth. We've already seen this, and there's already an acknowledgement, whether tacit or otherwise, that Amalia Falls Hydro will not be done before the next election. It will take a little bit more time than is anticipated. As a result, what has happened is that this project is not going to be up and off the ground anytime soon. We've got difficulties with high electricity costs. We've got difficulties with unemployment because we don't have any manufacturing or much manufacturing because of these high electricity costs. We were, or at least some members of society were relying on Amalia to be a big brace to help to bring those prices down. That's not going to be the case as it stands currently. We'll have to wait and see if another company bites and comes in. But the pursuit of Amalia Falls is what I find to be a bit entertaining, because the idea is there are so many other ways that you can generate the electricity that you need to generate. Do you need to pick the absolute hardest way to do it as your method of choice? This has got to be the hardest way to produce electricity in this country. You could just put a solar farm. You could put a little, well, no, I wouldn't say little. You can put a solar farm at the Wilson Estate, where we're looking to do the gas to shore project. You would have endless land left over. You can just put a solar farm at that estate, and you could easily produce the type of power that Amalia is going to be producing. Easily produce it. You could, in fact, double the amount of power that Amalia is producing. Can you imagine that? You can double that. You can easily increase the amount of power that's being produced. But at the very least, you can increase it by this, $200 million gap that exists between the cost of setting up a solar plant and the cost of setting up the Amalia Falls plant. However, what is so interesting about this is that when you look at the cost of the wire, this is the wire that's due to connect Amalia Falls to the grid. It's going to land at the Sophia electricity site with GPL. It's going to land there, and from there supply the rest of the coast. So this is the wire that's coming in. Okay, good. Now that wire is pretty expensive. I know you may think, oh, it's just a wire. How expensive could it be? All it's doing is running a wire that shouldn't even be the focus of the project. But the estimates for that wire's cost range in the hundreds of millions, maybe even as high as a billion. We'll see. But the reason for that is that these sorts of electrical wires require a lot of infrastructure to keep them out of the way of everyone. Partially, I think, because they're high voltage and so on and so forth. So, as a result of requiring quite a lot of infrastructure to keep them out of the way of everyone, that creates, of course, quite a bit of cost. So it's expensive to have to build the metal, I guess maybe they can't leave us, but the metal supports, that's a good word for it. The metal supports that have to be put in place to even allow these cables to be elevated out of harm's way are incredibly, incredibly expensive. As a result of them being incredibly expensive, there was a lot of concern about Amalia Falls actually working out, a tremendous amount of concern about it actually working out. It's easy to say, oh, we want hydro, but it's hard to do if you don't have good systems in place. So, as a result of not having good systems in place, there's a question as to whether Exxon may pull out or may even slow down its rate of development of its oil resources, which would be similarly bad. So that's what's going on with the Amalia Falls project. But let's think about some alternatives. On the lowdown, as I said, we like to keep it light. We like to have a laugh. We like to talk about issues in the news, and we like to take a different spin on them. The cost of actually moving towards solar and moving less towards making use of natural gas or indeed Amalia's perpetual headache, it will be much cheaper. There's an indication that it will be much cheaper to use solar power because it's 2 to 3 times cheaper than the hydroelectric power that comes out of Amalia. So much, much cheaper. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the cost of solar energy, so energy from the sun that's used to make electricity, that cost has fallen off of a cliff. It has gone from all the way up here, all the way down here. And so the cost of actually doing that is incredibly low, much lower than it is for solar installations. And so as a result of that, it seems the PPP has decided that the way they're going to bypass everything is to actually go and set up, the way they're going to bypass this whole thing is actually go and set up something separate. So I've just lost my train of thought. One second, viewers. It's so juicy that I've lost my train of thought. Essentially the reason that solar has a big advantage over Amalia's systems is that the solar plant can be right on the coast, and you don't have to set up a big elaborate You don't have to set up a big, elaborate um, electric transferal system, a wire essentially between the Amali Falls Hydro and the coast. You can actually just do something right here on the coast for solar, and that would save you the hassle, first of all, of setting up and maintaining that kind of a wired connection. But second of all, and this is one of the big things, it will save you a lot of cost. Now, when I say save you a lot of cost, you see, viewers, it's so juicy that I got a little bit carried away there. When I say save you a lot of costs, I'm not talking about a small amount of cost, the difference here. This is really the heart of why, the heart of why there's a big conflict in terms of experts about what they expect that Somalia Falls might actually cost. Now, the 700 million that's quoted by the government, they're including in that cost the cost of the transmission line, the electricity transmission line from Somalia to here on the coast in Sophia. They're including that in there. But it has been demonstrated that the cost to transport the electricity just from the gas to shore project all the way over to the Sophia distribution site is about 90 million US, give or take. And that the cost, therefore, if you're looking at a similar cost structure and you're looking at the vast different distance that Amalia covers, that works out to in excess of 900 million US. That works out to a huge, huge amount of money. But that is a best case scenario costing. And in fact, if you think about it, an electricity line that runs from Wales to Sophia is running through built up areas that have infrastructure, that already have roads. An electricity line that is running from Malia Falls in Region 8 all the way to Georgetown on the other side of the country has to go across the entire hinterland region. And in fact, many wet areas, you're talking about rivers, swamps, you're talking about mountainous areas, crossing some major rivers. You're talking about, jungle here. And that is why there's a real question as to what this thing is going to cost. And when I say there's a real question, there are estimates that put the cost of the transmission line for Amalia at like 3 billion US, the cost of the transmission line itself. So, whereas the PP seems to think that this thing's going to cost maybe a few hundred million US, there are estimates that put it at billions of US, billions of US. And that is a monstrous risk, a monstrous risk. So now that we've seen that the actual contract to build and operate is essentially falling apart, what we're seeing is that if we're asked as a country to finance this particular hydroelectric dam, we may be looking at a risk of several billion US in terms of what this thing could end up costing us. So the cost could easily triple or quadruple on us, no sweat. This is a very, very technically challenging project because it requires quite a lot. Now, on the flip side, if you did solar right at the Wales Gas to Shore, right next to the Wales Gas to Shore project, if you just did some solar right there, what is the risk that's involved with that? Virtually none. There isn't much risk that's involved with doing solar right on the coast. You don't have to cross swamps and mountains and rivers and the entire country. You're right near to where the electricity has to be supplied. You're right near there. There's no need for all of the expenses, but most importantly, there's no need for all of the risk. And that's the real killer with Amalia, is that the risk with that project is monstrous. The risk with solar essentially is almost zero. The risk with Amalia is like 3 billion US. And so the question is, why in the world? Why in the world? Folks, I like to have a little laugh at this. Why in the world would a PvP go for a project where there's a risk that it could cost as much as 3 billion US? Why would you do that when you could easily do solar where the risk is like zero? And then so it's kind of one of those strange scenarios. And what we're seeing now with the Chinese contractor pulling out is that this project already has demonstrated that there's some question marks, and it's not clear what's going on. So we want to hear more about why this contractor has pulled out. But given it's technically difficult and given the extreme risks that are involved, it's an area where we'd like to get a bit of information. And so I just make a simple case to folks, whether you're a supporter of the PvP, whether you're a supporter of the coalition. I make this simple case to you folks. Shouldn't we just work with a project that's slightly less risky, that's not risky, something that is easy to do? Why are we looking to do the hardest possible project, the most complex possible project? Why are we looking to do that? We should be doing the easy one, which is the solar project. And so it's quite hilarious, because if I had to guess, I would say that there's going to be more trouble with Amalia of one form or another, and that the probability that this project will be executed smoothly is 0%. Now, I said before that the probability that the project would be executed smoothly was zero. It was like 0%, right? It was next to nothing. I said that before. Now we've already seen that the project is not going to be executed smoothly because of what's going on with the contractor. And so I would say that that 0% rating that I gave the project before has been 100% correct. So let's see where they take it. It's going to be fun, folks. It's going to be fun. But essentially, a solar project is cheaper, and it's so much easier to do. All right, so now that we've talked a bit about the perpetual calamity that is the Amali Falls Hydroelectric project, we want to talk a bit about the cost of living. We want to talk a bit about the cost of living issue, and so my producers got a picture of Amalia Falls up there just as a reminder for you folks of what it looks like. And there you go. Let's move forward to a couple of the other slides. Let's see, so we can get to this is the Chinese contractor talking again about not wanting to be involved. Let's go with the next slide. All right, let's jump over to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Back one slide. Back one slide. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So this is someone posting. People take the social media when they're anxious about various things. So this person's posted something, and I'll just give you a sense of it. Just left the supermarket. Grocery bill gave me anxiety. How do people who work for $65,000 per month survive? Especially those people who rent and have children. My goodness. So, it's no secret. Everyone is aware that there's a serious cost of living issue in Guyana. If you're not aware of that, I guess you don't shop at all. And good for you. You must be living a very relaxed life with your 12 butlers. But what's going on is that the price for many things has gone up. This is partly due to the inefficient spending by the government, lots of spending but not spending well, partly due to international factors. Of course, you've got the war in Ukraine, which sent the price of wheat through the roof, sent the price of wheat way up. So that is something that some people have expressed a bit of concern about. Totally understandable. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing something to try and address the issue. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing something to try and address what is going on. And we should be. And so, what we've seen is a really paltry attempt by the government where they barely put not even a percent of the national budget towards mitigating cost of living expenses. Barely put anything towards that. And so while we're seeing this massive surge in prices, we're not seeing a robust effort to deal with it. And so, the government has indicated they expect 4% inflation, give or take, but inflation, is 7-8% in many parts of the world, and probably is even higher in Guyana. It'll have to be investigated. So numbers that are way off, and it's something that's incredibly concerning to the average citizen. And so let's jump across to the next slide there. Okay, so now we're seeing that an FAO report has indicated that Guyanese are actually skipping meals to beat these high food prices. Um, folks, have you heard something more concerning than that in the past few years, that Guyanese are skipping meals to try to make ends meet? That's got to be some of the most concerning and things that we've basically heard. That's really disturbing. And so what we've seen is that there's tremendous food insecurity. People are not sure if they'll be able to afford to eat, if they'll be able to afford their next meal. They're very anxious and worried about that. That's what food insecurity is. And so it's also indicated in this report that food insecurity is above the regional average. So we're even worse off in terms of our anxiety about food insecurity than in other parts of the Caribbean, even worse off. Now, of course, we've seen the government say that they're giving farmland to Barbadian youths. And of course, we want to see regional integration and so on. But if we are in a country where there's so much anxiety about food and anxiety about production, you would think that we should kind of prioritize getting Guyanese farmers to be, to get as much access to these lands as possible, because it seems that our citizens are more concerned than citizens across the region about where they're going to get their next meal, and the availability and the price of food. So it seems maybe that the government's not quite got its priorities straight. Guyanese are out here skipping meals. They're worried about whether they're going to have enough to eat. The food prices are to the roof. But we're giving farmland to people from other countries to engage in production, presumably to export to those other countries, despite the fact that we are even more concerned than them about high prices. It seems a little bit of a misplaced priorities. Not that we're not against other countries being able to produce here, because of course we'll be looking to get some of that sweet tax revenue. Okay, so that's one thing that is has created some considerable concern. One thing that's created considerable concern, and what it has led to is a furtherance of the debate around the cost of living and minimum wage, and how we can how we can reduce the level of inequality that we see while also growing our economy. Let's get the next slide up there. Okay, so I've mentioned that there's now there's some talk about the minimum wage issue, and so we're actually seeing people be very vocal about this. So this is a commentator, and he's indicating that he thinks that the current national minimum wage is a woeful amount. It's only $44,200, which is a very, very, very low amount. The original posting cost of living we covered was talking about $65,000. This is way below that. And there's a push for the minimum wage to be moved to uh, $60,000, the private sector minimum wage, and then for it to be moved to an even higher amount than that, an even higher amount, maybe $75,000 or so. This $60,000 has actually already been approved by a tripartite ministry committee that is supposed to deal with the minimum wage issue. And so that $60,000 has gone to the Minister of Labor and has gone to Cabinet. But we have not heard back. We haven't heard anything in response regarding the $60,000. We've not heard anything. And that is deeply concerning, because this is a matter of great urgency for families on the lower end of the income scale, a matter of great urgency. But we're not hearing out anything out of Cabinet. So this is an area where citizens need to apply as much pressure as possible. We need to really get the government focused and thinking about this, because it is not acceptable that in a country that is growing at this rate, in a country that is doing this well, in a country that's starting to receive oil revenues, and mind you, we started off this show by saying that oil is where? Over $120 a barrel. It's way above. It's at a very high level. But at the same time, the minimum wage is still where it was several years ago. The country has grown and grown and grown and grown, but the minimum wage is not grown at all. We've seen companies' profits go up as well. Substantial profits have been made. Minimum wage not been moved. This is very concerning and an issue that needs to be pressed. It's something the PNC has said that they see as a matter of urgency and want to see dealt with immediately. So that's one thing that has come up that is pretty concerning. Let's get the next slide up as we continue this discussion. So what we've also seen, we've in the course of this discussion, is that uh, there's been cries that the local workforce is not benefiting from the growing sectors, but that the benefits are very narrowly concentrated in the oil and gas sector. And some entry level jobs have been reported as being as much as $400,000 for entry level job in the oil and gas sector. Which is, nothing to sneeze at, right? It's a reasonable bank. So we're seeing that in the energy sector, at least, you're seeing a lot of money in the oil and gas sector being paid out. You're seeing local corporations as well make lots of money because there's more people in the country. Their stock prices have gone up because the value of housing in the country, of the real estate that they have, has gone up substantially. So that's impacted them as well. But on the flip side, we've not seen the minimum wage increase. Now, to give you a bit of a better understanding of the significance of this issue, of why this is actually something to look closely at and to be concerned about. Um, uh, if the stock market goes up 500%, which it has over the course of the past few years, that means that those who own stocks, if they own primarily stocks, let's say there's wealthier people, have gotten 5 times richer over the course of just a few years. On the flip side, minimum wage, the wage that workers are paid, has not budged over the course of that same time period. So you could argue that by that measure of inequality, where lower income people hardly own any stock, which is a part ownership of a company, you can buy and sell the ownership, and higher income people have substantial amounts of stock, much of their savings. What this means is that the gap between the lower income people and higher income people is massively increased in only a few years, which is very concerning when it comes to inequality. What we're seeing is a lot of inequality. That is what we're seeing, and it's something that I think is has raised up people's, or actually brought um, people's attention, has captured people's attention lately. So that's what we're seeing here. As much as our capital markets value, that's to say the value of all of the businesses that are public in our local stock exchange, has gone up 500%. Folks are not making much more. The other side of this, which is something we cover quite a lot on our show, is that the price of housing in Georgetown and these banks, certain areas on the East Coast, where you see oil and gas activities, has gone through the roof. It's like incredibly high. And the Private City Commission recently came out to say that has tripled. If you have seen any of my other shows, I speak quite a bit about this. And if you're charging rent, and the amount of rent you can charge has tripled, you can imagine that you'll want 3 times as much money before you'll sell your house. So someone who has a $50 million house or $100 million house would have made a couple of $100 million there. $100 million house might be worth $300 million now. So that's like $200 million that you would have made in just a couple of years due to the changing circumstances in the economy. Again, if you don't own any property, let's say you live on the dam, what we were confronting is a situation where people who live in those circumstances, don't have property, may have seen no increase in their wealth, whereas those who have property in many good areas in Georgetown and around will have made hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the level of inequality that we're talking about. That's the immediacy of the inequality that we're talking about. And that's why it's so concerning. Now, on the flip side of it all, the the PNC has put forward a few proposals to help to deal with this inequality and this cost of living issue. We've of course talked about raising the minimum wage for both the public and private sector. For the public sector, you need consultation with the unions to keep going, continue to get those wages up. But the private sector, especially, we need to get those wages up as soon as we can. We've also talked about agricultural grants, especially for those farmers that have short-term crops. The reason we're saying this is crops with a shorter life cycle, a shorter crop cycle, we can get farmers to expand production by helping them to purchase equipment, to clear new lands that might be available to them, and then they can produce more and kind of push these prices down a bit through economies of scale. So if you're producing more, you're able to produce at cheaper rates. And so as a result of producing at cheaper rates, excuse me, as a result of producing at cheaper rates, you're actually able to charge less for the food. So that's one way to drive down the price of food. That's something that we've advocated. That's something we brought up today at the press conference, and it's something that is pretty critical to helping move our country through this period of very high inflation. We've also talked about NIS and old age pensions and that area. And the reason that we brought that up is that we know that the elderly members of our society, or much valued members of our society, they typically are not on the higher end of the income scale because they may be just living off of a pension. And so when we see prices rise and rise quickly in the way that we have, they are often some of the people who are suffering the most because their income is fixed and their income is not on the higher end. So we as economists will call inflation a tax upon the poor, and in this case, it is really a tax upon the elderly who are lower income. And so we want to see the benefits that you get from NIS and pensions, old age pensions, and so on increased, so as to help people, senior people, to weather the storm, help them to weather the storm. Similarly, we believe that there should be a subsidization of electricity rates during this period. The electricity bill that people pay is a significant chunk of what it is that they spend their money on in the course of a month. It's a significant chunk of what people spend their money on. And so what we're saying is that we need to get some sort of a relief for electricity rates. You'll also observe that we produce much of our electricity from the burning of fuel oil. So basically, hydrocarbons, oil. We have generators that produce electricity from burning that. And so as the oil price increases, you'll see the electricity cost increase. And in fact, I think it's a month or two ago, we saw GPL say that at the higher oil prices, they may have to raise their rates because they won't be able to produce electricity at the same cost. We don't want to see that again. We're trying to get ahead of that problem. We've observed that the oil price has gone back up. It may stay up. It's already, as we indicated, above $120 dollars a barrel, so very high again. And we're already seeing from a mile away that GPL may have to be concerned again about raising rates. We are saying that that should not be done and that we should maintain lower levels of electricity rates, because we are producing oil and benefiting from these higher prices. As beneficiaries of the higher prices, we now have more revenue than we would otherwise have had. So we can use that revenue to cushion the effect on households. And one way to do that really well is through subsidizing the electricity rate or reducing the electricity rate so that we pass along the benefit rather than passing along the cost to citizens and making their lives much more difficult, which is what unfortunately appears to be the case. Similarly, when you talk about transportation, we mentioned today that we want there to be transportation vouchers for the elderly, for school children, for people with disabilities, because we recognize that many of those are from households that are vulnerable on the lower income level, many of them, and that they are again feeling the pinch. As you see the price go up, you're seeing taxi prices go up, bus prices go up. You know, a taxi driver told me plane today, oil price raise. You don't buy gas, and so that is something that is starting to trickle into the economy and fuel this entire inflation struggle. The higher price of oil is fueling the inflation struggle. So we think that people who are most vulnerable should again be shielded from that. And that can be people who are elderly, people with disabilities, some school children. We want there to be transportation vouchers to help them to ease that burden. Additionally, one of the things that happens also during when the oil price is high and when all of this is going on is that you can see the price of fertilizers and so on go up. Now we've seen the government mention that they want to buy $1 billion worth of fertilizer. That's fine enough, but of course the overall allocation, this 5 billion to fight cost of living, is just way too low to realistically have a big impact. So while that's one thing that they're attempting, whether it will have a real impact is very much questionable. But what we think is that when we see these higher prices, if we can shield at least the families, or if we can shield at least children from facing from having to cut back on meals, as some articles we've reviewed earlier indicated Guyanese are cutting back. That will go a long way towards ensuring that children do not have learning loss. They're able to focus in the classroom and do well, and to adding relief where it is most needed. So there should be an expansion of that school feeding program to help us to move forward. That is pretty critical to the country. Now, to close off, I just want to wrap everything up in a tight little bow for you guys, and hopefully that'll give you a takeaway that you can internalize well. But now that we're seeing a delay again with the Amalia Falls Hydro project, now that we're seeing the gas to shore project be redesigned over and over and take a long time to get started, we have to understand that there's an impact to this that is going to be substantial over the medium to longer term, and we're starting to see it. The PPP has really thrown all their eggs in the basket of cheaper electricity, allowing for job creation and so on, and bringing down prices and so on through manufacturing and so. If these projects are delayed by many years, which it seems that they will be, that means that the jobs will be delayed by many years, if there are indeed even going to be these jobs. What that means is that for the average Guyanese who may be looking towards an economy that provides jobs, provides income, that helps you to move forward with your life, you may be looking for a long time. You may be looking for a very long time in order to see that progress. Because these critical elements of the Guyanese economy, critical elements, are lagging way behind where they should be. And so, I'd like to paint a light and positive picture always, but it doesn't seem that under the PPP, with the way that they're currently running the government, you're going to see relief, the type of real relief, higher income jobs for large numbers of people, thousands, tens of thousands of people. You're not going to see that in the near future. You're going to be waiting, and it may indeed, if this track record of mismanagement continues, these mass jobs may never arrive. And so on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call the show to an end. Thank you for joining us, as always, on the Lowdown. My name is Elson Low. Thank you for starting your night on a high with Elson Low, and we'll catch you on Saturday night. Thanks.